"You're not welcome in this house anymore, Mom," my son said at my retirement party, his voice calm enough that most people thought it was just a joke, but I knew it wasn't. The room went quiet in that strange way large rooms do, where the music keeps playing but conversations dissolve into thin air, like everyone suddenly remembered something else they needed to do. I steadied myself, my hand brushing against the edge of the round banquet table covered in white linen, the same kind I had chosen for countless family celebrations over the years. I could feel eyes on me, coworkers I had spent 35 years with, neighbors who had watched Daniel grow up, even a few of his business associates who didn't know me at all but could sense something had shifted. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I simply straightened my blazer, the navy one I had bought for this exact occasion, and looked at him the way I used to when he was a boy and had done something he knew was wrong but hadn't yet decided whether to admit it. He didn't look away. That was the first thing I noticed. Daniel had always avoided my eyes when he felt guilty. But tonight, there was no hesitation, no softness, just a kind of quiet certainty that felt colder than anger. Olivia stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile fixed and polite as she greeted guests who were pretending not to notice what had just happened. 3 days ago, I would have told you this party was the happiest moment of my life. 35 years working as a school administrator, waking up at 5:30 every morning, driving the same 12 miles to the same building, making sure every child who walked through those doors felt safe, valued, and seen. I had imagined tonight differently. I thought Daniel would stand up, raise a glass, maybe say something about how proud he was. Instead, he had chosen this moment to draw a line I didn't even know existed. I glanced around the room again, taking in the details I had missed earlier, the way Olivia had arranged the seating chart without asking me, the way my name wasn't printed on any of the reserved tables, the way Daniel had taken over every decision in the past week with a confidence that now felt less like care and more like control. It was all there, laid out in plain sight, like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to put together. Someone cleared their throat nearby. A server passed with a tray of champagne flutes, the bubbles catching the light from the chandeliers above. I picked one up, not because I wanted to drink, but because it gave my hands something to do, something steady. "Congratulations, Margaret," one of my colleagues whispered, her voice tight with discomfort. I smiled at her, the same calm smile I had worn through parent-teacher meetings, budget cuts, and years of quiet sacrifices no one ever noticed. "Thank you," I said softly. Then I turned back to my son. "If that's how you feel," I replied, my voice even, measured, "then I understand." The words surprised even me, but once they were out, I realized they were true. Not because I agreed with him, but because in that moment, I finally saw him clearly, not the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder, not the teenager I defended when teachers called about his attitude, but the man standing in front of me now, making a decision he thought would end my place in his life. He nodded once, as if we had just concluded a simple conversation about something trivial, and turned back to his guests. The music grew louder again. Conversations resumed, though softer now, cautious. I took a slow breath and looked around the room one last time. This was supposed to be my ending. My retirement. My celebration. But as I stood there, holding that untouched glass of champagne, I realized something else entirely had just begun. I did not leave right away. That was the part no one expected. I stayed exactly where I was, standing near the table with the untouched champagne glass in my hand, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if my son had not just drawn a line through 35 years of motherhood in the middle of a room full of witnesses. People resumed their conversations, but the tone had changed. Laughter came out thinner, forced. Every now and then, someone would glance in my direction, then quickly look away when they realized I noticed. I had spent most of my life reading rooms like this, understanding what people did not say. Tonight was no different. Olivia moved through the crowd with practiced ease, thanking guests for coming, adjusting details that no longer seemed accidental. She had chosen the venue, the menu, even the playlist, and now I could see that she had also chosen the narrative. This was not my celebration. It had never been. I took a small sip from the glass, more out of habit than desire, and let my eyes follow Daniel as he spoke to a group near the stage. He looked comfortable, almost relieved, as if something heavy had finally been set down. That, more than anything, told me this had not been spontaneous. This had been planned. 3 days earlier, I had noticed the first crack, though I did not recognize it for what it was at the time. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, going through a stack of retirement paperwork, when Daniel walked in without knocking, something he had not done since he was a teenager. He asked casually if I had signed all the documents from the bank, his tone light, but his eyes too focused. I remember telling him I was still reviewing them, that I preferred to take my time with things that mattered. He nodded, but there was a pause, just a second too long, before he said that Olivia might be able to help organize everything. At the time, I thought he was being considerate. Now, I understood it differently. Later that same afternoon, I had gone upstairs to look for an old file and found my bedroom door slightly open. Olivia was inside, standing near my dresser, holding a folder I did not recognize. She smiled when she saw me, a quick, polished expression that never quite reached her eyes, and said she was just looking for spare linens. I had believed her. Or maybe I had chosen to. That evening, Daniel mentioned that after my retirement, it might be better if I did not have to worry about managing the house alone. He said it gently, almost kindly, but there was something rehearsed in the way he spoke, like lines memorized ahead of time. I remember laughing softly and telling him that I had managed this house for over 20 years without any trouble, that I knew every corner of it better than anyone. He smiled back, but it did not reach his eyes either. Standing there now, in a room full of people celebrating a life I had spent decades building, I could finally see how all those small moments fit together. They had been preparing for this. Not just tonight, but for something much larger. I set the champagne glass down carefully on the table, aligning it with the edge of the napkin as if precision still mattered. Then I reached into my purse and felt the smooth edge of the envelope I had placed there earlier that day, before I had any idea why I felt the need to bring it with me. I had trusted my instincts enough to prepare, even if I had not yet understood what I was preparing for. And now, as the music continued and the room pretended to return to normal, I realized I was no longer confused. I was no longer surprised. I was simply aware. It was not one single moment that changed everything, but a series of quiet realizations that began to settle into place, each one sharper than the last, each one impossible to ignore once seen. I remained near the edge of the room, no longer pretending to be part of the celebration, just observing it as it unfolded without me. Daniel raised a glass near the stage, thanking everyone for coming, his voice steady, confident, practiced. He spoke about hard work, about transitions, about new chapters. He did not mention me by name. Not once. A few people clapped politely. Others shifted in their seats. I noticed how Olivia stood just slightly behind him, her posture relaxed, her expression composed, as if she had already rehearsed this version of the evening in her mind and was simply watching it play out exactly as planned. That was when another memory surfaced, clearer now than it had been at the time. 2 days before the party, I had received a call from the bank, a routine confirmation about a document I had supposedly signed regarding property management. The young man on the phone had been polite, but there was hesitation in his voice when I told him I had not finalized anything yet. He asked if perhaps someone else had been assisting me. I remember saying no, that I handled my own affairs. There was a pause on the line, followed by a careful suggestion that I might want to come in and review everything in person. I had agreed, but the appointment was set for next week. At the time, it felt like a minor inconvenience. Now, standing here, it felt like a warning I had not fully understood. I watched as Daniel stepped down from the small platform and began greeting guests again, his attention easily shifting from one conversation to another. There was no sign of discomfort, no trace of what had just happened between us. It was as if, in his mind, the matter had already been resolved. I reached into my purse again, my fingers brushing against the envelope, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to think beyond the immediate moment. I thought about the house. About the documents. About the way Olivia had stood in my bedroom holding something that did not belong to her. About the phone call from the bank. About the quiet urgency in Daniel's questions. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were forming a pattern, one that pointed in a direction I could no longer dismiss. I had spent years believing that loyalty within a family was something unspoken, something that did not need to be questioned because it simply existed. But now I could see that while I had been building a life based on that belief, someone else had been building something else entirely, something calculated, something patient. I picked up my purse and slipped the envelope into a more secure pocket, my movements slow, deliberate, unnoticed by anyone around me. Across the room, Olivia laughed at something someone said, her voice light, effortless. Daniel leaned in slightly, listening, nodding, as if everything was exactly as it should be. I felt no urge to interrupt them, no need to correct what had just been said or done. That part of me, the one that would have tried to fix things, to restore balance, had gone quiet. In its place was something steadier, something clearer. I turned toward the exit, not in defeat, but with intention, understanding now that whatever had been set in motion tonight did not end here. It had only revealed itself. And for the first time, I was ready to see it all the way through. The night air felt different the moment I stepped outside, quieter, as if the noise from the party had been sealed behind those glass doors along with everything that no longer belonged to me. I did not rush. I walked at the same steady pace I had carried myself with inside, my heels clicking softly against the pavement, each step measured, controlled. The parking lot lights cast long shadows, stretching across the asphalt like silent witnesses. I reached my car, placed my purse on the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment without starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel, still, composed, but my mind was no longer searching for answers. It had already begun arranging them. 3 days before tonight, after that call from the bank, I had done something I rarely allowed myself to do. I had followed a feeling I could not explain. Instead of waiting for the appointment, I drove down to the branch the very next morning, unannounced, asking to review every document connected to my name. The woman who assisted me had been kind, professional, but there was a carefulness in the way she spoke, as if she understood that what she was about to show me required a certain level of preparation I had not been given. She placed the files in front of me one by one, each page clean, official, stamped with dates and signatures that looked familiar at first glance and then, not. My name was there, written in careful script, but something about it felt off, too smooth, too practiced. I did not say anything right away. I simply turned each page slowly, letting the details settle in. Property authorization. Access permissions. Transfer requests that I had never approved. The timeline was precise, deliberate, all within the past few weeks, all aligned with conversations I now remembered differently. When I finally looked up, the woman met my eyes and asked, very gently, if I had personally signed every document. I shook my head once. That was all it took. The room seemed to shift, not dramatically, but enough for me to understand that what I was looking at was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. A quiet, carefully executed plan that relied on my trust more than anything else. I asked for copies of everything. I did not raise my voice. I did not express outrage. I simply gathered the papers, placed them in an envelope, and thanked her for her help. She hesitated, then suggested I might want to speak with someone about legal protection. I told her I already knew who to call. Sitting in my car now, I reached for that same envelope, pulling it out and resting it on my lap. The weight of it was not physical, but it was real. Inside were answers I had not been looking for, proof of something I had never imagined I would need to prove. I thought about Daniel again, about the way he had looked at me tonight, not with anger, but with certainty. That certainty had not come from nowhere. It had been built, reinforced, supported by something he believed was already settled. I placed the envelope back into my purse and finally started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered on, steady and familiar. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I did not look back at the building. There was nothing left there for me to see. What mattered now was not what had been taken, but what had not yet been finished. And for the first time since all of this began, I understood exactly where I needed to go next. I drove across town without turning on the radio, letting the silence settle into something steady instead of empty, my mind no longer racing but moving with quiet precision, like I was following a path I had already walked in another life. There was only one place I needed to go, and I did not hesitate when I pulled into the small parking lot just off Maple Avenue, the same building I had visited years ago with Robert when we first bought the house, when everything had still been simple and honest. The sign on the door had changed slightly, updated lettering, a more modern finish, but the name underneath remained the same, and that was all I needed. I stepped inside, the faint scent of paper and polished wood greeting me in a way that felt strangely familiar, almost grounding. The receptionist looked up and offered a polite smile, asking how she could help, and I gave my name without explanation, my voice calm, steady, the way it had been all evening. She nodded after a brief pause, then picked up the phone and spoke quietly before gesturing for me to take a seat. I did not wait long. When the door at the end of the hallway opened and Thomas Caldwell stepped out, I saw recognition settle across his face almost immediately, followed by something else, something more serious as he took in my expression. "Margaret," he said, his voice warm but careful. "It has been a long time." I nodded once. "It has," I replied, rising to meet him. "And I would not be here if it were not important." He did not ask questions in the hallway. He simply stepped aside and led me into his office, closing the door behind us with a quiet click that seemed to separate everything outside from what needed to be said inside. The room was exactly as I remembered, shelves lined with files, a large desk neatly arranged, everything in its place. I sat down across from him and placed the envelope on the desk between us, my hand resting on it for a brief moment before sliding it forward. "I need you to look at these," I said. He opened it without hesitation, his expression shifting as he reviewed each page, his eyes moving more slowly with each document. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was focused. When he finally looked up, there was no confusion in his face, only clarity. "Did you sign any of these?" he asked. "No," I answered. He nodded once, as if confirming something he had already begun to suspect. "Then we have a situation," he said carefully, choosing his words with the same precision I had come to expect from him years ago. I leaned back slightly in my chair, not surprised by his response, only waiting for what came next. "How serious?" I asked. He folded his hands together, resting them on the desk. "Serious enough that whoever filed these documents believed you would not question them," he said, his tone measured, "and confident enough to proceed without your knowledge." I held his gaze steady, unshaken. "They were counting on that," I replied. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded again, this time with a different kind of understanding. "Do you want to stop this quietly?" he asked. "Or do you want to make sure it never happens again?" The question lingered in the air, simple on the surface, but carrying a weight that reached far beyond paperwork or property. I thought about the past few days, the careful steps, the quiet manipulations, the moment tonight when my place had been dismissed as if it had never existed. Then I looked back at him. "I want everything protected," I said, my voice calm, unwavering. "And I want it done properly." He gave a small, approving nod, already reaching for a notepad, already shifting into action. "Then we will begin immediately," he said. And for the first time since this began, I felt something settle into place, not relief, not yet, but control, clear and steady, exactly where it needed to be. Thomas did not waste time, and neither did I. The next morning, I sat across from him again, this time with a folder he had prepared, organized with a precision that mirrored the clarity I had begun to feel. The documents were no longer just evidence of something done to me, they were the foundation of what would come next. He explained each step carefully, not because I needed reassurance, but because every detail mattered now. We reviewed ownership records, access permissions, account authorizations, each one traced back, corrected, reinforced. Nothing was left vague. Nothing was left open to interpretation. I listened without interruption, asking only when something required absolute certainty. That was the difference now. Before, I had trusted the people around me to act in my best interest. Now, I trusted the process. When we finished, he handed me a new set of papers, clean, precise, reflecting exactly what was mine and what would remain mine. "These will override anything that was filed improperly," he said, his tone steady. "And we will put additional safeguards in place. No changes can be made without your direct approval, in person." I nodded, taking the documents and placing them carefully into my purse, alongside the envelope that had brought me here. It felt different now, not heavier, but resolved. As I stood to leave, he added one more thing. "They may not realize what has changed yet," he said, watching me closely. "But they will." I met his gaze without hesitation. "That is fine," I replied. "They have already shown me enough." When I stepped outside, the morning air was crisp, the kind that carried a quiet sense of beginning rather than ending. I drove home slowly, not out of uncertainty, but because I wanted to see everything clearly when I arrived. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, the same white siding, the same front porch. Robert had insisted on building even when we could barely afford it, the same maple tree in the yard that Daniel used to climb as a boy. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, noticing how calm I felt. Not angry. Not hurt. Just aware. I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door, reaching for my keys out of habit. When I tried the lock, it did not turn. I paused, my hand still on the handle, then tried again, slower this time. Nothing. A small detail, simple, expected even, but it confirmed what I already knew. They had moved forward without me. I did not knock. I did not call out. Instead, I stepped back from the door and looked at the house, really looked at it, as if seeing it for the first time in years. Every window, every line, every memory attached to it remained exactly where it had always been. The only thing that had changed was who believed they had control over it. I reached into my purse and touched the documents inside, not to check them, but to remind myself that what mattered was no longer based on assumption or trust. It was defined, protected, and in motion. Then I turned away from the door, not because I was leaving, but because I understood something they did not. This was not the end of my place in that house. It was the beginning of something they were not prepared for. Instead of knocking, I walked back to my car and sat down once more, not out of hesitation, but because I understood that timing mattered now more than anything else. They believed they had already won, that everything had been settled quietly, cleanly, without resistance. That belief was their greatest mistake. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling calmly until I found the number I needed. It rang only once before being answered, a familiar voice greeting me with the same professional steadiness I had heard earlier that morning. "Thomas," I said. "I am at the house." There was a brief pause on the other end, not confusion, just calculation. "And?" he asked. I glanced at the front door, still closed, still unchanged in appearance, yet no longer accessible in the way it had always been. "The locks have been changed," I replied. Another pause, slightly longer this time, then a quiet exhale. "All right," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more precise. "Do not engage. I will handle this." I nodded, even though he could not see me. "Of course," I said, ending the call without further discussion. I placed the phone back into my purse and looked ahead through the windshield, my reflection faint against the glass. I did not feel anger. That surprised me at first, but the absence of it made everything clearer. Anger would have made me react. And reacting was exactly what they expected. Instead, I sat there, allowing the situation to unfold exactly as it was, without interference. After a few minutes, I noticed movement behind the curtains in the living room window. A shadow shifted, then stilled. They knew I was here. That much was obvious. But they did not come to the door. They did not step outside. They did not acknowledge me at all. That, more than anything, confirmed the distance they had already created in their minds. I reached for the envelope again, opening it just enough to see the top page, the official stamp, the corrected records, the protections now in place. Everything was aligned. Everything was ready. I closed it carefully and placed it back inside my purse, then opened the car door and stepped out once more. This time, I did not approach the front entrance. Instead, I walked slowly along the edge of the property, past the maple tree, past the side of the house where the windows of the dining room faced the yard. I could see inside clearly enough. Daniel was standing near the table, his posture tense, his phone in his hand. Olivia sat nearby, her expression no longer relaxed, her composure slightly fractured, though she was trying to maintain it. They were speaking, but I could not hear the words. I did not need to. I already understood the conversation. Something had shifted. Not in the house, not in the locks, not in the physical space they believed they controlled. It had shifted somewhere far more important. I stopped for a moment, letting my gaze rest on them, not with longing, not with regret, but with clarity. Then I turned and walked back toward the driveway, each step steady, each movement intentional. They would learn soon. Enough that control is not defined by who holds the key, but by who holds the truth. And for the first time since this began, that truth was no longer hidden. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, I heard it before I saw it, the low, steady sound of a car pulling up behind me, tires rolling slowly over the gravel, deliberate, unhurried. I did not turn immediately. I already knew who it was. The engine cut off, a door opened, then closed with a quiet, controlled finality. "Margaret!" Thomas called out, his voice carrying just enough to reach me without breaking the stillness of the moment. I turned then, meeting him halfway as he walked toward me, a slim leather folder in his hand, his expression composed but focused. He glanced briefly at the house, then back at me, reading everything he needed to from the situation without asking unnecessary questions. "They are inside," I said simply. He nodded once. "I expected that," he replied. Without hesitation, he moved past me and toward the front door, his steps measured, confident, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly where authority stands. This time, there was no pause at the entrance. He knocked, firm but not aggressive, the sound echoing through the quiet afternoon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, through the glass panel beside the door, I saw movement again. Olivia appeared first, her expression tight, controlled, though the edges of it had begun to unravel. She opened the door just enough to see who was there, then wider when she recognized him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. Thomas offered a brief, professional smile. "Yes," he said evenly. "I am here on behalf of Margaret Hayes." The name settled between them, heavier than it had any right to be. Olivia hesitated, just for a second, before stepping back slightly, allowing the door to open further. Daniel appeared behind her, his posture rigid, his expression shifting the moment he saw me standing a few steps away. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not quite fear, not quite confusion, but something close to both. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharper than before, though still controlled. Thomas did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He opened the folder and removed a set of documents, holding them with the kind of calm authority that did not invite interruption. "This," he said, "is a formal notice regarding unauthorized filings connected to this property and associated accounts." Daniel frowned, stepping forward slightly. "There must be some mistake," he said quickly, the confidence from the night before no longer as steady as it had been. Thomas met his gaze without flinching. "There is no mistake," he replied. "These documents were submitted without the legal consent of the primary owner. They have been reviewed, corrected, and officially nullified." The words landed quietly, but their impact was unmistakable. Olivia's hand tightened slightly at her side, her composure slipping just enough to reveal what she had been holding back. Daniel looked from Thomas to me, as if searching for something to challenge, something to deny, but finding nothing he could stand on. I remained where I was, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply watching as the reality they had constructed began to shift under its own weight. Thomas continued, his tone unchanged. Effective immediately, all prior changes are void. Any further attempt to alter ownership or access without direct authorization will be subject to legal action. Silence followed, not the uncertain silence of the party, but something heavier, more defined. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a conversation. This was the moment everything they believed had already been decided was undone. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly, the certainty from before now replaced with something far less stable. Olivia said nothing. She did not need to. The shift in her expression said enough. I took a single step forward then, just enough for my presence to be undeniable, but not enough to disrupt the balance that had finally been restored. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to explain. Everything that needed to be understood was already clear. And for the first time since this began, they were the ones standing in uncertainty, not me. Daniel was the first to break the silence, though his voice no longer carried the certainty it had the night before. Now it was thinner, strained in a way I had never heard from him before, as if he was searching for solid ground that no longer existed beneath his feet. "Mom, we did this for you," he said, the words coming out carefully, almost rehearsed, but lacking the conviction they once had, and I looked at him for a long moment before responding, not with anger, not with disbelief, but with a clarity that had taken years to earn. "No," I said quietly. "You did this because you thought I would not notice." And the truth of it settled into the space between us with a weight that could not be argued away. Olivia shifted beside him, her composure now visibly fractured, her eyes moving between Thomas, the documents, and me, calculating, adjusting. But finding no version of the situation where she still held control, Thomas closed the folder slowly, his role complete. His presence no longer needed to speak for me, because everything that needed to be said had already been made clear. I took another step forward, just enough to stand at the threshold of the home I had built, not asking for permission, not seeking acknowledgement. Simply existing in a place that had never stopped being mine. "You changed the locks," I continued, my voice even, almost conversational. "But you never had the right to change anything else." Daniel opened his mouth as if to respond, then stopped, whatever explanation he had prepared dissolving before it could take shape. I could see it now, the realization, slow but undeniable, that what he believed had been secured was never his to control in the first place. The house behind him, the accounts, the decisions, all of it, built over decades, protected in ways he had not understood. Olivia finally spoke, her voice softer now, stripped of the confidence she once carried. "We were trying to make things easier," she said, but even she seemed to hear how hollow it sounded. I did not argue with her. I did not list the documents, the timelines, the intentions that had been so carefully hidden. I did not need to, because the truth had already done that work for me. Instead, I simply nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of what had been revealed. Then I reached for the door, placing my hand on it with the same familiarity I had carried for years, and stepped inside without hesitation, the air inside the house unchanged, still carrying the quiet traces of a life I had built piece by piece, memory by memory. Daniel stepped back instinctively, creating space without being asked. Olivia remained still, watching. Her silence now complete, I walked past them, not stopping, not looking back, moving through the hallway, past the photographs on the wall, the same ones I had hung myself, each frame exactly where I had left it, nothing altered, nothing erased. I paused only briefly in the living room, my gaze settling on the familiar details, then continued toward the center of the house, turning back just enough for my voice to carry without effort. "Retirement," I said calmly, "was never the end of my life." I let the words rest there for a moment, then added, with the same steady tone, "It was just the moment I stopped overlooking things I should have seen all along." No one responded. There was nothing left to challenge, nothing left to reinterpret, only the quiet understanding that the balance had shifted, and this time, it was not temporary, it was not uncertain, it was final. I moved further into the house, leaving them where they stood, not defeated, not broken, but confronted with the truth. They could no longer avoid, and as I reached the room that had always been mine, I realized something simple, something clear, something that did not need to be spoken aloud again. I had not lost anything that night, I had only seen it clearly for the first time, and that made all the difference.